totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to the Booked on Rock podcast. Our guest is Craig Odanovich. He's the author of a book called Craig's Record Factory, a young entrepreneur's journey through the 70s and 80s. Craig grew up in Flour Bluff, Texas. In an era before Dairy Queen officially expanded their menu beyond dessert, Craig learned entrepreneurial principles working for the family-owned franchise. Later, as a young music entrepreneur, he launched a successful record store, Craig's Record Factory. It was a time when neighborhood record stores were still a prime point of connection between popular music and the public. The experience augmented Craig's passion for music and prepared him for future business ventures. He rose to the executive level in the early video rental industry. He competed neck-to-neck with Blockbuster and led growth for the regional grocery chain H-E-B, where he applied his skills towards building value in subsequent competitive business arenas all the way until his retirement. But not one to shy away from a new endeavor, Craig dove into writing. In just 2.5 years, he published the steamy adventure trilogy called The Black Widow Trainer. He's on the podcast to talk all about his book and his experiences, so let's get to it. To hear a playlist of the music we talk about in this episode, just head over to the show notes page. Craig, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. This was kind of a local book, and I appreciate you picking it up on a national podcast.
Well, as I had said to you before, pretty much anyone who's listening to this podcast knows what it's like to walk through a record store. It's a great experience. I know there were quite a bit more back in the day, but there are thankfully some still around these days.
Actually, with the revival of vinyl, I'd really like to see a lot of small vinyl stores pop up and reemerge across the country. I think we have a good opportunity for that to happen. And I was talking to David Ingram of Ingram Distribution, who I got to know when I was running the video chain, and we bought so many videos from him, and they're still in business. And he said their vinyl sales are going through the roof each year.
Who would have thought, right? That's so great to see. But who would have thought in this era now with technology and streaming services, vinyl records, they're coming back. It's really cool. The numbers aren't as big as what they were, I suppose, back in the 70s and 80s, but boy, they are pretty good. And it's great. I've heard a lot of people who have sons and daughters who they only listen to music on vinyl. That's all they listen to.
I'm starting to hear that too. At first, I thought it was just us baby boomers and all nostalgia. But then I also knew from being in the stereo shop business too that the quality is a lot better. But I think ultimately holding one of those albums in your hand is you can download something, you can say, "Hey Siri, play me this song," but picking up one of those albums with all the money and that they put into the covers, there's just something exciting about it, and it's sitting there waiting for you to play. It's visual. You can see what one you're going to put it on, and but it's a lot of nostalgia too.
Yeah, you do make a personal connection to it, as opposed to when you stream something. I find myself excited to hear an album, and I stream it, and then I may not go back to it at all. I just kind of forget it. There's an investment you make when you go out and purchase a record, a vinyl record. I want to get into your record store days, but let's first back up. We're going to start in the beginning here. And you grew up during such a great time, as you write in the introduction in the book. It was the age of the muscle car, and you had one. A baby blue 1969 GTO equipped with a 400 cubic inch, 350 horsepower engine and a honking Hurst 3 speed shifter on the floor. That sounds very cool. I'm not a car guy, but it sounds cool. You were literally living a Bruce Springsteen song. Can you talk about your childhood years, where you grew up, how your love for music began at the age of 4? This was back in the, 50s and 60s, right?
Yeah. I'll dial her all the way back. My dad moved from Minnesota to Corpus Christi, Texas, and the little area we're in is called Flour Bluff, Texas. And he opened a Dairy Queen, and the Dairy Queen is out of the Midwest, and that's how he knew about it. but there probably wasn't a Dairy Queen within 1,000 miles of us. And so they gave us the franchise. And my dad, he's always been a free thinker. And so he added a back room to it so the high school kids could dance back there and eat. And it became the high school hangout. And he had a jukebox, one of those old, I wish I still had it from a collector standpoint. Matter of fact, I wish I still had my GTO. But the kids all remembered that. They would hang out there at night. And even when he shut that down, the whole Dairy Queen was a spot in the Flour Bluff. After the Dairy Queen closed, that's when things picked up. And a lot of drinking, a lot of fighting, a lot of stories. It was, I was living right there, and we had a house across the street. So I was living right in the middle of all that. My music came from probably sitting on the back side of that jukebox at night before my folks closed the Dairy Queen and went home, and because there wasn't anybody to babysit me. And so all those nickels or whatever they were throwing into there, I was hearing all those songs of Elvis Presley, and I don't know, you just name them, all the 50 songs. And matter of fact, I did a test about 5 years ago, and on Sirius, I went to the 50s channel, and I thought, oh, I just wonder how many of those songs went in my head and stuck there. And I was shocked. I mean, I bet 85% of the songs I recognized. And I mean, these are songs I was listening to when I was 4 years old.
Those are all the artists that inspired the classic rock artists that will come after them. Chuck Berry.
Yeah. And
Elvis Presley.
And I almost had to look back now and reevaluate what the music was like. And it happened when I was listening to the 50s channel, and it dawned on me the vocals and rhythm and you know, maybe a drummer keeping beat carried the songs, but they did such a fantastic job. And the lyrics, I'm not a huge lyric guy, but you wouldn't have survived in the 50s without good lyrics. And when the Fender amp came out and we went electrical, music really changed after that. But the music was still good before they figured out how to make it happen.
There was a $100 bill that was pinned to the wall of your dad's Dairy Queen. Can you tell this story?
Yeah, they came through. Willie Nelson movie Honeysuckle Rose came through there, and we had the old accordion phone booth where the only way to get in is the door bent, and you got in to use the phone booth. And so they used that in the movie. They had a scene to shoot there, and after it was over, they gave my dad $100 in a check for using the phone booth, and he just pinned it. He never cashed it. He just pinned it on the wall inside the Dairy Queen. Another interesting thing happened in that phone booth is my dad's was ex-World War II tank commander, and my sister had been dating a boy that he didn't approve of, and he left the house right across the street, and she was talking on the phone. And so right before he got to the Dairy Queen, he looked, and in that phone booth was the boy that he didn't want her dating.
Ooh. And
he knew what was going on. And I just feel for the kid when my dad pulled that accordion door open, filled up the escape route, and pulled out that meaty finger of his. That's the last time we ever saw him.
Oh boy, yeah, he was a tough guy, and you learned about business and work ethic through your dad. He served in World War II, as you said. Talk about him a little bit more. What was the most important thing that he taught you?
Well, he's just all business. A very fair guy, all business, and a hard worker. And so when he got the Dairy Queen, I mean, this is a 7 day a week, 10, 11 hour a day job. and he never complained. He got to work. He added hamburgers and French fries and stuff that Dairy Queens didn't have at the time. All the Dairy Queens up north were simply fast serve, and so the only royalty he paid was on the mix. And we sold some shakes and we sold some cones, but mostly his burgers were so good we were a burger shop. And he'd go into town every day and have Moody's Meat Market give him the freshest burgers, no preservatives. He'd hand pick his tomatoes. He'd cook his French fries in peanut oil. I mean, it was really, really good. So he was always working. He always told me, pay your bills on time. Then he had us working. At 14 years old, I would work every summer on our island Dairy Queen, and I'd work 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's just what we did. I mean, now there's probably child laws against it, but I didn't look at it as abuse. It was a family Dairy Queen. My sisters were doing the same thing, and that's what was requested of us. And so I did it and didn't think anything twice, but I'm sure, that instilled the work ethic in me going forward.
Yeah, no shortcuts, no easy way to get to the top. You had to work for it.
That's right.
By the way, a fun fact here you include in the book. When your dad opened the restaurant, burgers were 25 cents, cheeseburgers 35 cents, fries 15 cents, drinks were either a nickel or a dime. That says a lot about... Man.
Yeah, and I look back and I'm thinking, man, that must have been some expensive cheese. It went from 25 to 35.
Do you remember what was gas per gallon back then? Can you remember?
In my GTO, I was coming back from probably Minnesota, and I passed through Texarkana, and they're having a gas war for the Arkansas side and the Texas side, and I got gas for 19 cents a gallon.
Wow.
And my folks paid, in the early days, paid their workers 25 cents an hour.
Man. What part of Texas is Flour Bluff in?
It was unincorporated. We always wanted to incorporate it, but the city of Corpus Christi overpowered us and took it in. But it's in between Corpus Christi and Padre Island. And it's split up by the Oso Bay and the Laguna Madre, which is the body of water between Flour Bluff and Padre Island. And so all you had to do is head over the causeway and you were at the beach. And I mean, I'm talking the beach in the days that cars could drive right on the beach. Nowadays they try to keep you off, but it was miles and miles. And you'd go out there on the weekend and everybody'd pull up in their cars and drink their beer and, playing the sun. Some people would be fishing out there. We had a big Bob Hall pier where people could go out and fish at the end of the pier. It was a real destination for people in that area. Then you go up north and go to Port Aransas. They call it Port A. And it's where all the shipping, deep sea fishing boats go out of, and a town of fishermen there. And then it was the Flour Bluff. I mean, everybody got along with each other. Doesn't matter what ethnicity or whether you were blue collar or white collar or fisherman. It was real. It just was a great family.
The actor Lou Diamond Phillips is from Flour Bluff, right? That's in your book.
Yeah, Lou. He graduated in 1980. I didn't go to school with him. I graduated in 1970. But yeah, it was Lou Diamond Phillips.
Now let's talk about your mom a little bit here, because your dad was a good businessman. Your mom, however, she showed you the importance of treating customers right. If you do, they keep coming back. Can you talk about your mom, what you learned from her?
Again, all I had to do was watch how she treated people. She was a deeply religious person, but private with her religion. I mean, not someone that goes out and tries to convert people into religion. The one thing we did do, we We worked 7 days a week, but we always went to church on Sunday morning. And she just loved people, and they could feel that. I actually, when I released the book, I mentioned her moving into the record factory and handling the front end years later when I did my big store. And I got an email from somebody that said, and he's an executive with a refinery down there now. And he was thanking me for writing the book because, I had the old nightclubs and things in there, and it brought back fond memories. But he said, I remember your mother. And his exact words is, she always treated me like royalty. And he said, I'll never forget that.
Goes a long way. You say in the book you got to see ZZ Top in their very early days. I believe this was in Corpus Christi, Texas. Do you remember what year this would be?
Yeah, it was 1970. And when we went to see them, somebody suggested we go. I didn't really know who the heck they were. And it was at the Stardust Rollercade. Just a rollercade that was big building, and they made it big enough for a small band to play. No beards, young kids.
That's right, yeah.
And while I was there, I had a friend that's a good drummer, and he just was fixated on their drummer. And he said, this guy's good.
Frank
and
Beard.
I'm like, okay.
That was, Frank Beard,
I said, okay, I'll buy that. And then, it wasn't until later on that it dawned on me, who ZZ Top really was and what they developed into.
Yeah, man, you saw them at the ground floor when they were just starting.
Yeah.
What about Led Zeppelin 4? That album stands out for you. You take us back to the 8-track days. You would cruise around in your car listening to Zeppelin 4 on your 8-track. I'm sure we have listeners who remember the 8-track, but for those who may not know what this wonderful state-of-the-art invention was, my older brother had one. He had, I think, a Toto album, and I think Jay Giles Band. You couldn't rewind. You couldn't skip to any song you want. Yeah, for those who don't know, what is an 8-track machine?
Well, it's just loaded up with a winded tape, and luckily it lets you switch to 4 quadrants, so at least you could get close to the song you're looking for. And if the song you're looking for is at the beginning of that quadrant, you could do a pretty good job of listening to it over and over. I can't remember if that's the way it was with Led Zeppelin 4 Stairway to Heaven, but I'm surprised I didn't burn that tape out. That song, there were several albums that kind of really got me reeled in. One was Three Dog Night, Suitable for Framing. One was the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's. And the Beatles were around. They were just a little bit ahead of my time when they started. I thought they were, very talented, cute band. But to tell you the truth, a little too bubblegum for me. Then they came out with Sgt. Pepper's. And I'm like, whoa, these guys, they flipped the corner. They're on to something now. And they really started showing their depth. That made an impression on me. But the Led Zeppelin 4 and Stairway to Heaven. And that's what really made me fall in love with listening to music.
In August of '69, you also write about that summer, Woodstock set the music industry ablaze. This is when you decided what you wanted to do next with your life. It was a hip music store in Austin, Texas that lit your fire.
Yeah, Inner Sanctum was the store in Austin, and a very iconic store now. And I was in Corpus Christi, and I had just gotten out of college for a semester. And I never knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to take over the Dairy Queens. I knew you should go to college, but I tell you, for me, taking the same English courses and math courses over and over for 2 years was just like brain damage. And I had one business course that I aced, and so I should have known from there. But I came back and I went to Wolco, a little department store, and that's where I had to buy my music. And I thought, this whole music scene is blowing up, and that's the best we've got in Corpus Christi. So I went to my dad and called in my markers for all those years that I worked for him. And he's the kind of dad that, he wanted to help me. He wanted to help me get going. And I told him I'd move over to Corpus Christi College while I started this up. That didn't last long. And he borrowed, I knew the place to be was the Potter Staples Mall. And if I got in there, I had all that traffic and things would be wonderful. But I couldn't get in. So we figured the next best thing would be to be across the street from the mall. There weren't any strip centers. And so then my dad came up with the idea of having somebody build a small building. And there was an old car lot that had gone out of business. And we leased the space, built the building, ran septic all the way down from the Exxon station across several plots of land, and did some fixturing. Get a $20,000 loan, and most of it had to go for the building and the fixtures. So I had $5,000 left, and I drove up to H.W. Daly in Houston, who was a one-stop for buying music. And I said, look, I don't want to make any mistakes on this first 5,000. I want you guys to pick out my inventory. And they did, and they did a great job. And then I got everything all set up in the store, and, had my Aerosmith and Deep Purple on the wall. I always wanted to have I really believed in the artwork, and I always wanted the best albums to be face forward. I didn't want people thumbing through for them. And so I'd always build these walls, and then it would just be the latest hits were on that wall. And it gave it a great presentation, and it saved the customer time of going straight to it. And so for 3.5 years, I had to stay over there. I couldn't get in because first there was like a blue light head shop thing that had albums, but they weren't serious. And then a few years later, Hastings Entertainment came in, and they were selling, just basic stereo equipment and accessories and things. And they had one rack of music. And it was so frustrating because I just knew I could do a lot better. And so in the meantime, I just, kept doing the best I can. I was paying myself $400 a month. And Buddy and I had all bills paid nice apartment for $200 a month. So mine was $100. Man, now you can't even pay for the electricity for that. Oh. And
you're about 20 years old, right? When you opened this business. Only 20.
Yeah, I was 20 years old. And
1971, 72 was it?
72, September 14th, 1972. But I loved it. I mean, it was slow going. Well, I mean, I did okay business. I supported the loans payment and paying myself. I wasn't going as fast as I could, but I had great customers. And when they would come in, I would play any of the new music for them. I had a big thing on wanting them to make sure they liked the music before they bought it. Nothing worse than buying an album, thinking you're going to like it, and then it's not very good. And I'd also be very honest with them on, if a follow-up album came out of a great album and it's not quite as good, I'd let them know that. And it got to where, One guy came in one day and he said, I'm going shopping at the mall. I want about 3 albums. You know my taste. You know what's good. Pick them out for me. I'll get them when I come back.
That's so cool.
So I was developing a good core group of customers, great people, and I was satisfied at that age. I mean, I had other, at that age, you going out at night after you closed up, going to the local nightclubs, being 21, 22, 23. That's a profession of its own. trying to go through that and doing it in the 70s. I mean, my gosh, that was a great time.
Quite a few days with a hangover, I'm assuming.
I would make it to work, but the good thing is, I didn't open till 10, and some days if I left the house at 9:45 to get there, I definitely slept in. Yeah. And but then finally Hastings didn't make it. They went under. And I got a phone call from Mr. Wakefield at the mall, who was always rooting for me, but his hands were tied. And he says, I got a space for you. Will you take it? And I didn't even ask him what the rent was. I just said, or the size, I'll take it. And it was probably twice the size of what I had. And it was narrow and long, maybe 1,600 square feet. And it was a little challenging how to do the fixtures. But I had a great cabinet guy, Julian Alvarez, and I could custom do any fixtures. And he was with me for years, even in the future businesses. So we would rock the walls with the albums would come out from the wall for the catalog, and then above it would be the best hits all the way around the store. And we'd have a cabinet with the 8 tracks in it and the newer ones, and people could reach in there. We drill holes so they couldn't get it out, but they get their hands in. And then the whole back wall was filled with 8 tracks. And I would station employees behind there so that they could talk to them. They could hand them the 8 tracks and converse with them. I had 2 pairs of Bose 901s, and we had our turntable. And as I mentioned, we were very, very open. If somebody wanted to hear something, whatever we were playing, we'd take it off and we'd put it up there. And everybody in the store could hear it. And, the beauty of working in a record store, everybody grew up going to record stores. Everybody grew up going to concerts and having stereo at home and listening to records at home. But not a lot of people saw the industry like I did from the inside of a record store, from the business side. You go to work in the morning with slaps, T-shirt, shorts. All of our hair was long, and every week you get all the new records coming in. I mean, there wasn't anything that you weren't going to be able to listen to. So we got proficient with every group, every album that came out. And fortunately, I'm not a musician, never wanted to be, but I have a good ear for what's commercial.
Yeah, you were saying that you said that you didn't know any of the members of the bands, but you knew the songs and you knew if they were good.
Yeah, it was kind of strange. To me, it was a band and it was music, and I could evaluate it and I could sell it to my customers, and I needed to decide how much to buy. So I needed to know it well. But as far as the band members, that just blew past me. I mean, who these guys were playing this music. I'm not a musician. I applaud them. They're what make my life wonderful. But I don't know if I spent time with them, I just felt they would be in a different world. I don't know how well we would even communicate. for instance, when we did our bigger store, which we'll get to, the Craig's Record Factory, which is 10,000 square foot store, every bit as powerful as a Peaches, Sound Warehouse, you name it. 4 pairs of Bose 901 driven by 2 power amps. I mean, it was almost like a concert in there. And I built this platform that you stepped up on wood, and then you could walk around it, and there was a hexagon counter that went all the way around. And the reason I built it is I wanted that to be the command center. Every time we had product come in, I did an elaborate inventory control. It was manual, it wasn't computer days, but I had them log into these books when it came in, showing that we knew what was ordered and then showing that it came in. And so if they were working up there and they were manning the stereo, I knew customers could always get to somebody. You know, I don't know. You get frustrated nowadays. You go into a Walmart and you want to find something, and first you got to find somebody that can tell you where it is.
Yeah.
And then my pet peeve was if anybody ever asked where something was, you had to walk over there, get it, and hand it to them. You know, it's so frustrating to blurt out a quick direction, point over here, and then the poor customer goes out there and continues to search. So that worked very well. But what I didn't realize I was building at the time was the perfect platform to host rock bands when they're coming into town during the day before they played that night, and sign autographs. And so they could get in the middle of that. It was good size. They could be protected from the customers on the outside of the counter. They had all that counter space. They could all be signing autographs at one time. And then we'd be blaring out their music on the 4 pairs of Bose 901. We'd get hundreds of people for those signings. I mean, it was almost like a party.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Like the Booked on Rock podcast? Tell a friend and give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I want to ask you about, because you talk about having a great ear for music, and one song you heard and you knew was going to be a hit, but you were surprised it took a few years. Dream On by Aerosmith. You heard that and said, This is a hit. And it wasn't until, 2-3 years later on their second or third album that they went back to that song from their first album.
Yeah, it was the second album. Of course, they were throwing albums out pretty quick then. And it's a kind of song that takes you a few times to listen to kind of get what it's all about. But once I did, I'm like, man, this is really good. And so they came out with the second album and they started releasing songs off their second album. And I was like, wait a minute, you never released Dream On. I mean, that's just criminal.
That's their stairway to heaven.
Yeah, exactly. It turned out to be, didn't it? I mean, all the way now. If you hear on Sirius, it's probably one of the most replayed songs of theirs.
Sure.
But before they got through releasing songs on their second album, they went back and released it. And it may have happened before, but I just can't remember many times that a band has moved on to another album and then turned around and released a song from a previous album. You know, another thing is I'm more the kind of guy that if you look at Elton John and some of these bands, I prefer their early music, very early music. And I think after they get in the mode where they have to like crank these things out, my assumption is that when they're hungry and they're creative and they're young and they're trying to make it, they put together a lot of songs. And when it's time to make those first couple albums, they're really picking their greatest hits out of years of work. And then after that, and then I'm sure the managers push them to be more commercial and stuff. some bands can completely drift away from their base and what they've been. But,
and they
I've
don't
always
give them the
liked early
time. They
stuff.
don't give them enough time the first albums are songs, like you say, they were working on and perfecting for a long time. And then they got the record label saying, we got to have an album. Let's go. They get off the road. They're in the studio for like 2 weeks and it's like, hurry up, come on.
Yeah. And creativity. I mean, if we have time, we'll talk later about the books I've written, but I learned writing and I write pretty fast, but I made a pledge with myself. If I wasn't feeling it, I wouldn't write that day or that week. I mean, and so those artists, they have to be in the right frame of mind, and you can't force something, or say, okay, you need a song tomorrow. That genius comes along at different times. And that's why the smart ones had paper and pencil with them all the time.
Yes.
Because they knew it could come at any time, and they better jot down what it was before it drifts away.
Frank Zappa had a quote about, in the early days, these record exec guys and record label guys were really just like the artists. They're the hippie guys, hippie dudes, and they were going to sign a band and say, yeah, these guys sound good. Let's see what we can do with them. But eventually it became more of a business. And then you had the guys in the suits with the cigars, and they're not really artists. And they're saying, we need a hit. We need it to sound just like the last one because the last one was a hit. And there's the disconnect between the artist and the business side of things. Yeah,
exactly.
Always that push and pull. What about radio stations? They had to drive a lot of interest in bands. Were the stations in that area, did you have a lot of good rock stations that were playing all these artists?
KZFM, the Rock of the Bay. That was we had KEYS and Chris, which are two stations I listened to. I had older sisters, and they always had music in the house, and it was one of those two, and they'd play the latest stuff. But when we got into the heavier rock and things, it was FM, KZFM, Rock of the Bay. They couldn't have said it any better. And years later, Charlie Bright, that was his radio name at Keys, and then he went on to be in the business side of KZFM. And at some point, they were going downhill, and he said, "Craig, what do you suggest?" I said, "Suggest? You were the Rock of the Bay, man. you were it."
Yeah.
I said, I'd head back to that. I mean, you're wandering around now trying to figure out who you are. You always were the Rock of the Bay.
Concert tickets. Were you selling tickets out of the store?
We did.
Yeah, because this is pre-Ticketmaster days.
Yeah. We had a guy out of San Antonio, and I don't know, for a few months, I wouldn't sell them because there was this big service charge. And I felt it wasn't fair to my customers, but, I was basically naive about it. I mean, everybody, then, I saw them sell somewhere else and the service charge was there. So I thought, well, if they're going to pay it anyway. And, we sold tons of we were the place. I had a store in the mall still, and I had the big record factory. And between the two, I guess we sold 90% of the tickets in the town.
Wow, yeah. These are the days when everybody would, the long lines, right? The lines would be all the way up. People would just basically camp out outside your store overnight, right?
Yeah, but once they got in, the store was 10,000 square feet. So we had plenty of room for them to line up comfortably. And we'd put extra people on it, and we'd get that line knocked down pretty quick because we had that staging area in the back, and we could be dealing with 4 people at one time.
Did radio stations do events at your store? Because I'm a huge fan of WKRP in Cincinnati, and
yeah,
there's a great episode where they're doing the live remote from one of the local electronics stores. Johnny Fever's actually the DJ, and the guy comes in and robs the store while Johnny's on the air. And I love that story. Do you have any crazy stories like that, like radio stations coming in to do remotes?
Well, what we had is we had the book signings with the artists, and but before I go into that, on the little store, they didn't come in while we were there, but it was on piers, And I had Craig car stereos. And one morning I walked in, and there's a hole in the floor, and they'd stolen all my Craig car stereos.
Oh my
But
God.
it was at night. And then they were bragging about it in the bar, and they wound up getting caught. And
Stupid.
I got them back.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I enjoyed was we had Judas Priest in the store.
Right. You said that they weren't all too friendly.
Well, it was probably as much my customer service, as anything else. Well, I had just come off of Def Leppard, and this was Def Leppard's first tour of the United States. I mean, it was like seeing ZZ Top when they didn't have beards. They were kids. They were the nicest kids. They were probably in awe of the store, in awe of Texas, being in a foreign land. Just wonderful. And they weren't even playing at the major venue there. They were something smaller, but we knew who they were. I mean, we recognized their talent and that they were going to be a monster band. So, I mean, we probably gave them a whole lot more credit than they gave themselves. But I came off of that, fantastic. And then Judas Priest, and a lot of people were there. I mean, hundreds of people. And they didn't show. And after half an hour, I'd mill around out there to see how people are doing. And then when it got to an hour, I mean, my gut was turning. I just felt so bad for my customers. And I'm thinking, if somebody would have called in, I could have said they're running late, they're coming, but they hung in there. The customers hung in there, and it's well worth their while. But when they came in through the back door, we're sorry, we had this, we're that. They just came in just crazy, wild, pushed by, and went out there. And I just knew myself, and I said, I think I'll just get in my car, go drive around Corpus Christi for about an hour, let everybody have a great time, cool off, and don't make any kind of scene. So that was interesting. And then, so the next one, the record label got a limo, and they wanted me to go downtown in the limo and pick up Ted Nugent at the Sheraton. And I thought, now that's a great idea, because I know where he's going to be. I'm picking him up. I'm part of that process, getting to the store. So I get down there and get on the second floor and knock on the door, and Ted comes out all wild and crazy, his persona. And probably from listening to me for about 45 minutes now, I've always been surrounded by people with large personalities. I've always loved it. That's not me. So we're in the limo. We're halfway back Ocean Drive, and Ted figures this out. We start having the best conversation, just man to man, normal stuff, no wild and crazy. But we get to the back door of the record factory. He walks in, and like out of a can, bam, there he is again. He's a master at his personality, his charisma.
Like a switch.
So he goes out front. Yeah. And he's and the people tell me that he was one of the best, most courteous, and he'd sign everybody's autograph. So he came to the back room on the way out, and he walked over to me, and he said, put his arm around me, and he said, Craig, will you do me a favor? And I said, sure, as long as I can. He says, tell Denise and her girlfriend over there that if they come to the concert, I'll let them backstage. And I said, yeah, I can do that. So I told Denise and her friend, and they went backstage. And then the next day, about halfway through the day, I said, "Where's Denise?" Well, she went on tour with Ted. So she never called in or anything. So if I ever see Ted Nugent, I got a friendly bone to pick with him about taking Denise. I have pictures, and when you see Ted, you'll see a dark-haired girl right next to him, and you'll know that's Denise. Pretty girl, long, straight dark hair.
Denise worked for you? She was working at the store?
Yeah, she was my employee. Yeah, I relayed his message, and then he stole my employee.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Don't miss an episode of the Booked on Rock podcast. Subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or just go to the Booked on Rock website, bookedonrock.com, to find a full listing of podcast platforms where you can subscribe and follow. That's bookedonrock.com. There's one album and one song that stands out, you mentioned in your book. One that stands out is 1975's Equinox by Styx. You say in the book that this album defined your journey.
It did. We would always close up and go home. But with that album, and we were in the mall at the time, it was before we had the big store, we would close the doors and go back in the back and crank it up. And the mall was closed. I'm sure the sweepers on the far end of the mall could hear it, but we didn't care. And we sat there and we were enthralled with that album. We just, it was just something new that really hit us, that we thought they had gone in a different direction. And then they wound up having a concert. So we go to the concert, and I believe it was with Wishbone Ash. And I'll tell you what, I bet Wishbone Ash was so mad at their manager, because Wishbone Ash was the headline and Styx was the front band. And their concert was every bit as good as listening to the music on the album. They just completely blew everybody away. And when it was over, then Wishbone Ash comes out. And after a couple songs, low key, quiet melody, I mean, everybody started getting up and leaving. And we were leading the way.
Wishbone Ash
was one of the worst matches I've ever seen.
Wishbone Ash was managed by Miles Copeland, who later managed the Police. He was frustrated that band never really took off like he had hoped.
Maybe it's because in concert they just didn't have the they're good songs listed on the radio, but they didn't have the oomph. They couldn't get the fans riled up. By
the way, Equinox has Lorelei on it, which is still one of my favorite Styx songs. Great song.
Yes.
Yeah. That was the big hit off of that album. Then the song that you say when you heard it for the first time was the most exhilarating song you heard in a long time. Peter Frampton's "Do You Feel Like We Do?" That's from Frampton Comes Alive. I
said in the book, I almost pulled part of it out until the publisher said, "Oh no, that's the kind of stuff you got to leave in there." I said I woke up in my girlfriend's bedroom, which I did, and that song came on, and I just laid there through the entire song.
What a trip, right? Yeah.
Oh, and I'm going, what is this? And after it was over and I figured it out, I rushed down to the record store. I was in the record factory by then, and I went to look and see how many pre-orders we had. And I knew with pre-orders, you can get 10% extra off on your pre-order. And if you knew what it was going to be, you can step out there. Well, I checked, and the pre-orders were still open. And I had an okay amount coming, nothing crazy. And I called them up that day, and I loaded up on it to get that discount. And it was a very profitable album. It's a double album.
Yeah. That
we could sell for $7.99 and make almost half the money. It was record label's gift to record stores for making a lot of money. And at one point later on, we ordered an entire pallet of that. Yeah, it was it was fantastic. It was, but yeah, that morning I listened to that song and I said, if the rest of the album can come anywhere close to this, they got a monster.
And
I
it
heard the
did.
label said it blew them away too. They were never anticipating what it was going to do.
Nearly 15-minute track. And I remember hearing that on the radio when I was in high school. And just like you, just what am I listening to here? He's playing the talk box is what he was using.
Yeah.
Absolutely unreal. And to this day, he's still, that's the song that gets everybody up on their feet every time he plays it in concert. Yeah, that I would imagine you weren't able to keep enough copies in stock. That thing was selling so fast.
I don't want to bore your audience with the complete description of how I did it, but I took business and inventory very serious, and we tracked everything. And then we would write down each week, we'd inventory how many they sold. And then you had 60 days to pay. And I mean, I followed my dad's advice. I was paid on time, and we had 60 days to pay. And with a hot album like that, and you could order it every week, that one I could order close to 60 days worth at a time. I mean, because I knew it was going to sell. We did that with our deep catalog, like something like Harvest or the old Neil Young. You'd always order 60 days at a time because you knew how many you would sell in 60 days. And then you don't run out when you can do that. And then every 30 days you reevaluate. And if you are off, I mean, you're ordering another 60 days worth. So I don't know if I had any cost of inventory in the store.
Wow.
I mean, I managed it so close to be never run out, but always have it sold by the time we paid. So that gave me a great advantage on staying in stock on the latest hot albums. And then at Christmas time, there's a ramp up and a ramp down, and I knew the seasonality by week. And we would work on that to ramp up for Christmas and then start ramping down to the slow time. And there were Christmas, you could go into our stores 1 hour before closing the day before Christmas and pretty much being sure to find anything you're looking for. And if I didn't have a few of the new releases, it's because the label got behind and they didn't fill my order.
Wow. So it's kind of like a chess game. You're thinking ahead.
Yeah.
On a personal note, I'm a huge Van Halen fan. What do you recall about getting that first album in 1978, hearing Eddie's solo on Eruption? Were you blasting that through the store?
Oh, you bet. You bet. The only thing I can say is when that came out, there was just so much else out at the time. The industry was at its peak.
Boom.
And quality stuff was coming out. So all I can say is that I didn't enjoy it or have the time to single it out as much as I would have liked to because we were just inundated with good stuff.
Were you selling a lot of disco records?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was a huge seller in the late 70s.
Well, we'd shut down the record factory at 10 and right out our on the other side of the parking lot was Granddaddy's. And that was the club in Corpus. And it had stairways that went up high and a big dance floor, good sized place, classy looking place. They're playing hot stuff. And yeah, it was, that was right in the middle of the disco phase.
So much so that all the rock bands were well, not all of them, but a lot of the rock bands were getting in on that. Rod Stewart and the Stones with Miss You and
right.
Kiss,
right.
I Was Made for Loving You. And one story I forgot we didn't mention yet, a funny story about an artist, Christopher Cross. This is a good story. I love Christopher Cross. This isn't a shot at him, but his manager more so. Can you tell the story? You got the last laugh on this one.
Well, I was selling tickets, and I thought, well, we're selling the music, we're selling the tickets. Why not bring some of the bands ourselves? We'll sell our own tickets. And the first one that I got was Christopher Cross. And the other reason is Corpus Christi had just gotten Bayfront Auditorium, and it wasn't designed for rock. It was 2,600 square feet. They probably were thinking more orchestras and different things, but the acoustics were amazing, and the seat layout, the way it rose, was amazing. And so I thought, man, I gotta bring some bands here. So I contacted his manager, and he had, had his big 2 songs, and he came down, and we packed it out, and he did well. And I believe it was the biggest crowd he had played before at that time. And so when the manager left, I said, I know the Memorial Auditorium will hold up to, I think it was 5,000 or 6,000. I said, could you come back for me later, and we'll have you there? And he said, well, I don't know. We're heading pretty big. We're going to big cities and stuff. So as we all know, Christopher, that was his album. Those were his 2 songs.
It was Sailing, and was it Sailing and Ride Like the Wind was the other one?
Ride Like the Wind and Sailing. And so about a year later, I got a phone call from his manager, and he said, okay, we're ready. We're ready for you to bring him to the Memorial Coliseum. I said, man, I'm sorry, but that ship sailed.
Yeah.
But I also brought Stevie Ray Vaughan to the Bayfront.
Ooh.
Packed it.
Legend.
And this was early. This is when 2,600 people was big for him. And he rocked the place. I mean, anybody lucky enough in Corpus Christi to have been at that concert, man, give yourself a pat on the back. You'd sit there, and I felt like, with my long hair blowing out, I felt like that Memorex dude in that easy chair with his hair blowing back.
Oh, yes, exactly.
It was so intense, so awesome.
Have you ever seen anybody that played with more fire and precision than him? Every note you can hear, crystal clear, but he could play fast and with fury to his playing. It was like he was on another planet.
I had read where he had really big hands.
Yeah.
And he could do a lot of that stuff because of the power of his hand. It's just a shame that he didn't get a chance to go longer. There's no telling what stuff we're missing because that airplane trip, that helicopter ride.
Eric Clapton was there at that last show he performed, standing off to the side of the stage, and Eric Clapton is a legend, and he's watching Stevie Ray saying, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was going through, after the concert, I was going through some old photos, and the labels took me a lot of different places. And apparently, back when he was about 18, got a picture of me standing next to him on a boat on Town Lake in Austin, a meet and greet. And I mean, again, it's like ZZ Top. I didn't know who he was at the time,
From Dallas, Texas, the late great Stevie Ray. The book, Craig's Record Factory, A Young Entrepreneur's Journey Through the 70s and 80s. I'm just so fascinated with the part of your story that has to do with video rentals. Eventually, you get into the movie rental business. Early on, you had to pay $79.95 to buy a movie. But eventually, you're able to rent them out. But there were some legal hurdles at first, though.
Yeah, and it started in the record factory. One of the record label guys, I think from Warner Brother, came in, and he said, well, first, I had bought some Warner Brother movies, and an officer from the Kingsville Naval Air Station base came in. He bought it, took it back. Next week came in, said it was defective. I played it. It's not defective. But I knew. I could have said no. I won't refund you. But I knew what happened. I mean, actually, he paid $79. We were paying in the 50s. I said, nobody wants to buy a movie for $79, go watch it once or twice and bring it back. I said, this isn't going to fly. There's just no way this is going to fly. So the label came in, the guy, I wish I could remember his name, and he said, in Austin, Texas, they're renting these. And I said, really? I said, is it legal? He goes, nope. But they're renting them anyway. And I thought, well, getting $5 a pop, and then, your cost is 50, and then you just keep renting the same asset over and over. Now you're talking. Now I'm making good money, and my customers are happy. And so I thought about it, and I thought, well, what's the worst thing that happened to me? I mean, we're here in Corpus Christi. If they're going after anybody first, it'll be the major markets, and I'll hear about it. And it's so lucrative. I'll just make as much money as I can, as long as I can. And if anything comes up, I'll sell off the inventories used and move on. There's no way that I'm going to jail over this. So I went into it in a big way, and we became the dominant video rental place. There was a place called Les Felser's that was doing it, I found out, just a little ahead of me, and a good job, but we were the spot. And so we were doing big money. And at that time, it wasn't just new releases coming out. They had to release previous movies that had never been on video. So every week we were not only buying the new movies at the box office, but we were building our inventory with another 10 movies that came out over the last 10 years. And so we just rapidly put more and more money into it. Then there was the judge ruled as the first sale doctrine, which meant that if once they sold their video, we couldn't re-record it or anything, but once they sold it, they lost control of what we could do with it. So then it was legal. And that's when that was the best thing that ever happened to the studios. I mean, their business just exploded, and they were selling tens of thousands of videos. And then we were doing really well. And me, I'm always looking for what's the next thing to do. So I got this franchise, a buddy of mine that worked with me, David Solar. We were at Consumer Electronics Show, and they had what they called Porta Video, and they were videos in a hard case, and they were designed to rent. And back then, about 4% of the people owned VCRs. So if you wanted to sell more movies, you needed to rent them a VCR with the movies. So we would typically, for $20, rent them a VCR and 2 movies, and 10 for the VCR, 5 each for the movies. Because
VCRs weren't in most homes until mid to late 80s. I think our family got one in 1986.
Well, I did that in 1982. Yes. I had tons of them.
So you were renting them out because most people didn't own them. Because how much did it cost for a VCR in the early 80s?
Well, unfortunately, those in the beginning were costing me $900 each. Yeah. The price went down as we added more, and then it got to the point you didn't need to rent the machines anymore. But so you had to buy 60, and that was a lot. I mean, that was close to 60 grand. And I brought them into the record factory, and man, we had them out all the time, and we were just blowing and going, and we're renting that many more movies. So then I thought, well, what else could I do with it? And it was really supposed to be for a revenue sharing program where you'd go to a business, you'd provide them the machine and the movies, they'd rent it, they'd keep 30%, you'd get 70, but you had to supply them with the new movies. So I went to the supermarket chain HEB, which stands for Howard E. Butt, dominant chain in Central South Texas. just happened to still be headquartered in Corpus Christi. And I went in with a Portavideo and a couple movies. And the first buyer, very nice guy, but he hadn't even heard of Craig's Record Factory. But he says, look, I'm leaving and I got a new buyer coming. And I'll set you up with a meeting for next week. So he did. And I walk in, and a big guy, sociable, first-time buyer, had worked in the operations business, though, down without his wife, getting started. Deb was in San Antonio. And when I offered him the machine and a couple movies to take home to his hotel to entertain himself, he jumped all over it. And then he would come back and he'd swap those two out at the store and rent two more at the record factory. Kept him sane while he's waiting for his wife to come down. We're great friends to this day. I mean, he got it. He got me an opportunity in the Kingsville store. I went over there with 60 machines. They gave me an end cap to kick it off on a freezer aisle up by the registers. And Rick Mullinex, who worked for me, said, we got to play Rocky. And this is Kingsville's heavy Hispanic. So Rocky's blaring. The husbands are separating from their wives. They're standing around watching the great scene. And when it's over, Rick and I would go, how would you like to watch this in your own home? And the looks we got were like, what the hell are you talking about? So we would grab a machine, we'd hold the wiring, we explain to them what they have to do to hook to their TV, and that they can rent some movies in the machine and take it home and watch these things at home. And boom, wow. We had all 60 out the first weekend. If
there's anything that rivals the emotional connection to music, it's the emotional connection to movies.
Yes.
Had you found that out?
Well, and what I like is, I like to say the businesses I like being in is something that people spend their money, their discretionary money on. I mean, you have to pay your rent, have to pay your car bills, have to buy gas, have to buy food. You know, if you go out to dinner and get a good meal, that kind of qualifies as discretionary income. But when you have when you have money left over that you can spend, what are you going to spend it on? And records and movies. This is the sweet spot.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. The Booked on Rock podcast is on Facebook and Twitter. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Booked on Rock podcast and on Twitter at Booked on Rock. How did the numbers break down in terms of how much did it cost to stock a VHS movie versus how much you would make on rentals?
The economics of this was, again, I went real in depth on this. This is not like stocking B&M beans and restocking. It's like car rental. The minute you drive it off the lot, the value goes down, and it's perishable like bananas. For instance, long story short, I got into 60 H-E-B stores. They bought my company. They brought us on. We did our separate video division. We had 40 huge departments in grocery stores, and we had 35 freestanding video stores going toe-to-toe with Blockbuster. And when our top store, our highest volume store, let's say a movie did 100 million at the box, just to make it easy, and we would put 100 copies in that store. And then based off of volume, we would scale that down to all the other stores based off of their volume versus that store. Those movies we rented for $3, but they cost us $52. So if you imagine that stack of 100, The first weekend, you're going to get 3 rents. The second weekend, you're going to get at least 2. And the third weekend, you might get a few more. I mean, the movies sitting on the top of that stack are becoming useless as it dropped off on the availability that you needed. So you would never, ever make any money on the top of that stack. But on the bottom of the stack, it not only would continue to rent, you would later move it into not the latest new release, but the hot releases, and it would continue to rent. And then eventually you'd sell some off and you move it into catalog and then keep renting. So that's where you made your money. But the way we hammered Blockbuster is they thought giving it to you for two nights was a sweet deal and the customer would love it. And they did. And then I watched them and they'd bring them in on Saturday and they wouldn't even check them in till Monday. So they bought a movie that rented one time over the week. They got $3 on that thing. I did it $3 a day, and they had to have it back by 7:00. And then I said, don't even spend time taking it back to the walls. I had racks and just check them in immediately, put them in these racks, because there's no better time to re-rent a movie to a customer when they were already there dropping off a movie. So it was like a turnstile. They'd bring them in, rotate, and it would go back out. Because I realized when a movie's new, it's not the price, it's not the amount of time you take it home, it's the availability. And if I've got it, they're going to rent it from me. And if Blockbuster's out, they're going to come over and they're going to rent it from me. And the more money I can make on those new releases, the more money I have to put into more new releases. So I put a buying committee together and we all voted on how many we should buy, but we tracked every movie. We had books by actor, by drama, by action. We knew a certain, like Dolph Lundgren. It didn't do much at the box, but he's action. And he's going to sell a whole lot more because nobody's seen it. And if something gets too many million at the box, everybody's seen it. So that ratio has to come down. And then I had Greg Smith, my good buddy, very analytical, and he worked with Barry Bites they had IBM mainframes. And I said, we're going to track every movie we buy. My formula was if the entire 100 stack could pay for itself in 8 weeks, we hit our mark. All of them together, working together, paid for in 8 weeks. So then we would track it. And then I'd have him put a report together. And the report wasn't about whether we hit it on the nose or didn't hit it on the nose. The report was, what should we have bought? What was the right amount? So when we logged it into these books that we had that would tell you how many you should buy, it's what we should have bought of everything, not what we did buy. So as a result, we got into the dumpster at the regional store, and I can remember Art Seago came back from the dumpster dive, and we wound up getting Blockbuster's 4-state region results, and we could compare our stores with their stores, and we were beating them an average of 60% volume. And when you consider our other product, our hot titles and older releases were cheaper. We went $3 on the first, then 2, then 1. We were actually doing about double the volume of all the Blockbuster stores.
Man, what eventually happened to Blockbuster? Because as we know, they expanded throughout the 90s. By 2004, over 9,000 stores around the country. What was the mistake that they made? What was their downfall?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll lead anybody listening to this, and if you're really into this part of it, I mean, I've kind of brought you the very beginning of video rental, and then how we beat Blockbuster. Alan Payne, who was a head operations and came out of HEB, he learned the video business from me, and he learned it well. And then he went off and worked for a Blockbuster franchisee, and then ultimately had his own franchises all the way in Alaska and El Paso and South Texas. And he was his last store to close in Alaska was the second to the last store to ever close. He used our formula and crushed. Here the franchisees were crushing corporate. But corporate, they felt that if it didn't come from inside, it wasn't any good. And in the beginning, Wayne Huizenga, they came out of waste management. I mean, these are great businessmen. They know how to grow businesses. He's very successful growing it and selling it and making a fortune. But as far as running the business, waste management, what do? You drive a truck around the neighborhood once or twice a week and you pick up trash? I mean, that's not retailing. That's not video rental retailing. So they never got into all of that. And Alan wanted to show them our formulas and what we did, but they never wanted to listen to him. But Alan wrote an excellent book. It's called Blockbuster, Built to Fail. And he documents his time as a franchisee looking into the operation of Blockbuster through all of those years. And if you want to find out why they went down, that book will tell you.
It might be the one that inspired the Netflix documentary, which I saw. The documentary talks about how this had to do with the streaming services. Like they were starting to get in on it and then opted out of it ultimately and said, no, we don't need to.
Yeah, I think he was in that documentary. And I've got another buddy, Gary Ross, who worked for him. He used to be Musicland Group, and he was there the day that Netflix was offering to sell out to Blockbuster. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
Sitting right there. And Blockbuster decided that they could do it better on their own. So Reed Hastings, and it either would have been all of it or half of it, but Blockbuster was so arrogant. That's what I'm talking about. If it didn't come from inside, that they were going to do it on their own and then run Netflix out of business.
When was it that you saw the end of the huge run of record stores? Like we talked about early on, it's great. Vinyl records, the sales are going up. There are record stores still out there. We have Record Store Day, which is really cool because that helps to remind music fans that they're still out there.
That, yeah.
But when was it that you saw the end of its huge run? When file sharing started in the early 2000s?
I have to admit it slipped up on me. I was so involved, and going against Blockbuster, I went from having my first little store with $5,000 inventory to running a whole division in the middle of a huge corporation. And, that's a change of scenery. I mean, things work different there too. And so I was not looking back on the record business. I was still I've always listened to the latest music. I do now, but I listen a lot to Cirrus, classic rewind, and so I got to be honest. It happened behind me, and I probably wouldn't mind reading a book from somebody on the final days of that.
It was inevitable. I don't think there was anything that would have stopped it. Once file sharing starts to kick in and people are sharing music for free, and now they've tried to salvage it as much as they can with the streaming services and get a little bit, but still the artists are not making nearly the amount of money on records, singles, as they once did. Now it's merchandising, and you have to have a product. You got to have something you could put your name and image on, T-shirts, or selling a hot sauce or sneakers or cologne or perfume, or it's got to be something to make up for that lost revenue.
Yeah, it's a shame. It really is. It'll get figured out. There's some things coming on blockchain that is supposed to protect the artists, and I got to read some more on that. I've gotten a lot into crypto and Bitcoin, Ethereum, and everything going on blockchain. There's a lot of things coming. I think there's something in there that's gonna help the artists. Because right now you're seeing artists cashing in. They're selling their entire catalog, getting big money, but they're cashing out.
And as you know, you've been around long enough. You got to change with the times. Things change. You just got to change with it. Otherwise, you get left behind. And there's always something around the corner, something that can be done. When I interviewed Miles Copeland for his book, I asked him that question. He said, look, there's always ways so if you're not making as much money on albums, you find other ways to make money. And the touring industry, once it gets back, and it's pretty much back now to where it was pre-COVID, and that's where the money is too, So there's
some of the numbers that I think I heard Rolling Stone makes in just a few concerts, and had more money there than ever before.
Yeah. So your story does not end.
I'm not crying for them.
No, they're doing just fine. Your story doesn't end with your time working within the music and video industry. You wrote a series of erotic thrillers called the Black Widow Trainer series. This all started one day while you were at the gym, right?
Yeah, I was, in my early years, I'd hit the club and work out. And here I was, I don't know, probably 54. And I thought, until you get that age as a man, it's not a crisis. It's simply realizing you got one more go around. And so I wound up getting a trainer and spent a year at it and probably got in the best shape of my life. And it was a great experience. But while I was there, I was noticing all the other trainers and their clients and how they see each other 3 times a week. After they get to know each other, the conversations start getting more personal and family life. And yet, here's a trainer who's sharing in helping a person physically become the best person they can be. So there's a joint sharing of goals. And one night, I just thought of this simple premise of a really, really hot trainer who, a rich guy, convinces her to train him. Yeah, he was going back to Austria, and he's going to pay her big money. But it turns out that he'll pay her that money, but he gets to sleep with her once. And if he can't wait the entire 3 months, she gets her money and she goes home. And it's a situation where she had a hard time growing up. She's not getting along with her husband. They have money problems. Maybe a little bit on what was that, Indecent Proposal?
I was thinking about that with Robert Redford,
right?
And
Woody Harrelson. Who knows what somebody would do with money? So she continues to do this. And the first book, I'm writing chapters in Argentina. I flew to Alaska to write those. I flew to London to write those. And I put the book together. And then I went back. The second one is Captured Prey. And she trains somebody in San Antonio, but falls for a cowboy, but a sophisticated one that graduated from business school and had a good job on Wall Street, but the only reason that he's back is his uncle had died and he had to help take over the ranch. But then it goes into political espionage when she trains a senator. And then he's back in New York. So that relationship's kind of going some. And then the final one is Hanging by a Thread, where she gets in the middle of mafia in Vegas, and then they chase her to the islands. And that's where we are right now in our screenplay. So I wrote these books in my 50s, and I hired Michael Borden and Francisca Matus, two really good screenplay writers, and we're working collaboratively. And we've got the first one finished. We finished the second one about a little over a month ago, and I'm pushing forward with the third one. And I've got an agent, and we've had people interested in the first one, but I thought, what if I can put together an entire trilogy and drop on their lap so they know what they're buying? And I'll tell you that because I was learning as I went, the books get better as I go. So the second book is a lot better than the first, and the third's better than the second. And then the screenplay writers helped me prop up the first. So it's pretty good. So anyway, that's my next endeavor. And I don't know, it's started with opening that little music store and being a part of music, and then video rental, and then writing, and then screenplay writing. And if everything goes well, I'd love to be out in the field with the director, helping him think through scenes.
Outstanding. So nowadays, that is your main focus. You're no longer running the stores and all. You're just writing.
That and my three precious grandkids.
Oh, that's cool. What a life. Now, all of these books, including Craig's Record Factory, are they all through the same publisher, Holon Publishing Collective Press?
No,
okay.
No. Greenleaf is the first three. And then the reason the last one was Holon is they convinced me, they're the ones that convinced me to write it. And everybody went around it the wrong way. They wanted me to write a business book. And I said, I don't want to write a business book. I don't want to tell people how to run a business. There's enough of those in the world. But then I thought, I was in the record store business in the early days, in the heyday. I was in the video rental business right at the beginning. These are two golden eras that are long gone. They're not here anymore. And there's a lot, I've seen a lot. I've got a lot of stories. And then I thought about all the quality people that worked for me. I mean, it wouldn't have been fun without the people that we were like family.
And you have a lot of those pictures in the book too, which is great from back in the day.
Yeah. And it's like I can give back to Flour Bluff. I can give back to friends growing up. I get back to my customers in Corpus, to my employees, the record business, my employees in the video business, and there'll be a record of what they accomplished through their life. So it's a joint thing. I never expected to promote this nationally. It's simply, I've only marketed in Corpus Christi and to people I knew in HEB. And then we listed the employees in the very back of each one. So they're documented in there as having been a part of this journey.
Craig's Record Factory, a young entrepreneur's journey through the 70s and 80s. It is out now through Holon Publishing Collective Press. It's available wherever books are sold. Any websites or social media pages that you want to get out there?
I have a Craig's Record Factory Facebook site you could follow, but I also have a craigsrecordfactory.com, and on that I sell merchandise. What you're not able to see right now is how cool the logo is, and that was designed for a high school buddy of mine, and it's really an eclectic logo. And I have hats and I have shirts.
And people can also, we should let people know they can get the Black Widow books. Go to Amazon, Black Widow
Amazon.
Trainer series.
Yeah, Black Widow Trainer series and ebooks.
Craig, this was great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share my story.
You bet, and best of luck on your future projects.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks as always for listening. I'm Eric Senich. Join me again next time for another brand new episode of Booked on Rock.